I started speaking about the Al Pacino film. It is, I think, and I'll come back to it later, I think it is, although it's not the full text, it's almost the full text, and I think it's a very interesting interpretation of the play, actually following the interpretation that I want to give. So I'll come back to it, but I really do want to recommend that if you manage to borrow a copy from one of the cinematheques or get hold of it in some other way, do watch it, because first of all, the acting is superb. The final trial scene is marvelously done, and there are other things about it which I'll mention as I go on talking about the play. All right, I wanted to begin with a little exercise before we go on to the play itself. Our subject today is the other, right? And I wondered, first of all, who are your others? For each one of you personally, who is someone that you, or what group of people, right, are those whom you think of as others? Right? Seriously, is it a question of religion? Is your other someone who isn't a Jew? Is your other someone who isn't a female? Right? Is the other someone who is a different color? I mean, we call ourselves white. I don't know anyone who's really white, but you know what I mean. Right? What is it that distinguishes each one of us from that other? And how many others do we have? Right? Which of those others raises fear? Which of those others raises a certain degree of empathy? Right? Do we ever put ourselves in the other's shoes? Do we ever think of how that other sees us, relates to us? Are we a threat? Are we a support? Right? What exactly are we? Are we to that other? Right? I want you just to think about that for a few minutes, or no, 1 minute. We haven't got enough for a few, right? But what's your gut feeling? We live in a country, right, where there are citizens of different religions. How many of the others do we know? How many of us speak the language of the other? How many of the others speak our language? There are innumerable questions that one can ask oneself about this topic, the other. That was really our intention when the group that plans the study days decided on this topic. Because it seems to me, and I say this in the opening of my address, which I didn't give you, if we handed it out to you, right? We're living at a time of such hatred and such violence at the moment, right? Within the country, I'm not talking now about the world at large. The world at large, in my lifetime, do not remember a time when there were so many conflicts simultaneously all over the world. Right? There were wars, there were great wars, right? But everywhere, and think of how many of those wars are internal. Right? It's not even nation against nation. It's inside. Okay. What is it that causes that? And how can we respond? How must we respond to that situation? What does it impose on us? If we don't think about it, right? First of all, think about it, consider it, wonder whether it has to be like that, right? Or whether one can change it. And if one can change it, then how do I, as an individual, set about changing it? And it seems to me that unless we know the other, unless we meet the other, right, we can never change it. Right? You can't relate to something that you've never seen, you've never met, right, that you don't know. Right? So that was why we chose this topic, and that's why I wanted really to take these two plays of Shakespeare's, because in his greatness, I think that Shakespeare, particularly in The Merchant of Venice, I see Othello as different. I'll come to that if I possibly can. Right? But I think that what Shakespeare does here is raise questions. Yes. He always does that. Shakespeare doesn't do black and white. Right? There's never, if any of you know, he wrote this in response to another play by his contemporary, a friend, but also a bit of a rival, Christopher Marlowe, who wrote a play called The Jew of Malta, right? Where the protagonist, the Jew of Malta, is a terrible villain. I mean, there's nothing, he's awful. He is the sort of archetypal Jew who killed Christ. You know, that's always the final insult that used to be thrown at one when I lived in the diaspora as a child. I don't think anybody, there probably are places where they still say you killed Christ, but since the Vatican has changed its stand, perhaps other people have as well. Right? But
The Vatican changed its stand, but Catholic schools were very poor and couldn't afford new books. I'm not kidding.
But I think it's very important that the Vatican stand, look, it influences the priests, right? I mean, you don't have the kind of preaching against Jews that there used to be very openly. So, no, you know, it's, you never solve all the problems at one go. There are always people who are ignorant. There are always people who are prejudiced, right? Which of us here in this room can honestly say, I have no prejudices at all, right? I challenge you. I'm not going to ask you to put up your hands, right? Okay? But can you really say, there's no one about whom I don't feel fear, suspicion, anger, right? Sort of feel strange when they don't know how to speak to them, don't know how to address them, right? This is becoming, just recently I was discussing this with a friend of mine. I'm having a lot of trouble with transgender. Right? I mean, No, I am, because what do you call? In Hebrew, where you have to decide whether someone is an atah or an at, you can't get away by just saying you, right? So how do you address a transgender person who, where it isn't always clear what gender that person at this moment is? And now I don't think we have many cases like that here, but if you go to New York, you'd be surprised how many cases there are like that. And I'm embarrassed, right? I'm embarrassed because I don't know how to address these people. I'm not afraid of them. I'm not suspicious of them. I don't dislike them. I'm just puzzled, right? Embarrassed. So there are all these responses that are possible and that occur whenever, I think, almost whenever, we encounter someone who is significantly different from ourselves in one way or another. Now, I'm going to ask another question. How many of you were not born in Israel and did not grow up in Israel? Okay, right. Now, how many of you, before you came to Israel, experienced anti-Semitism, what you perceived as anti-Semitism? That's good. No, that's good. I had expected...
You needed more of this?
Yes. Do you want to...
Okay.
Okay, there are more copies of the text, but we'll get around to them. I just want to perhaps here speak again about my own experience. Right? I experienced anti-Semitism. I was born in Germany and had to leave Germany as a child because there was anti-Semitism. Right? Because the Nazis came to power and the Jews were expelled. Right? That we left very early. My father left in 1933, I left in 1934 with my mother and brother and grandmother, but we were not leading a normal life for the 11 months during which he was gone and we were still there. Right? And we had to be very careful. I was a child. I didn't really know what was going on. But I know that it was anti-Semitism and the search of our home because my father was a Jew, because he was active in the Zionist organization, because he was active in the Ostjüdische Gemeinde, the congregation of Jews who'd come from the East, from Poland. Right? Our house was searched. Right? One of my early memories, right, is of hearing shots in the night and then standing by the window with my father the next morning and seeing red in the snow. I was about 6 at the time. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't realize that it was blood. But my father said to my mother, they got the communists. Right? And as you know, the first object, I hope you know, before they got to the Jews, they started with the communists, right? The communists were the first to be hunted down by the Nazis. And a lot of the communists were Jewish. I mean, there was a lot of overlap. But the actual persecution of the Jews started afterwards, very soon afterwards. So I experienced that there already. Then we went to England, right? And I remember very distinctly during World War II having hissed at me by pupils in my school, not in London, I was evacuated to the country, right? One day passing 2 boys who hissed at me, dirty Jew. Right? Now, the interesting thing is that in that town where that school was located, there weren't any Jews at all until the evacuees came from London. Right? It wasn't that they'd known Jews, and even at our school there were 3 of us. 3 of us were Jewish, right, who'd come from London. None of us was local. Right? Or, for example, we lived in a little village which happened to be created by and owned by, more or less, James de Rothschild. Everybody in the village was employed by James de Rothschild, right? It was a small place. Everybody. He owned the village. They didn't realize that James de Rothschild was a Jew. This was the interesting thing. He wasn't perceived as Jewish. But when we came along, right, okay, oh, the Jews. And the East End, the Jews from the East End, the poor ones, were crowded into the village hall. There was one toilet for about 60 people, right? Okay, they slept in mattresses in the hall. It did not stay very hygienic for very long. So immediately, oh, the dirty Jews from London. Right? That tendency, now think, I've asked you previously about the other, the tendency to generalize about the other, right, as well. And I even experienced it when I was at university in Cambridge, where it was very subtle. The upper class British don't talk about dirty Jew, right? I mean, as I say, they're far more subtle. So it would take the form of, for example, oh, Miss Margulies, that's not an English name, is it? Right? Okay. Or when I was invited, students used to be invited. 2 students every evening were invited to eat with the dons, with the fellows of the college. And when this was during World War II, when anyway food was scarce, but when they got meat, I got a lump of cheese. In which case the conversation would be like this: "Oh, Miss Margulies, are you a vegetarian?" "Well, no, actually, I only eat kosher." "Oh, are you Jewish?" Okay. "Well, yes." And that was more or less the end of the conversation. Right? So it's not, you see, it doesn't have to be aggressive. You don't have to have stones thrown at you. You don't have to be sent to a concentration camp. It's there. It was there. I don't know whether it is. It always will be. As long as there are Jews, there'll be anti-Semitism, right? You can't have it because of the way we relate to the other, right? We don't stop generalizing about the other when that other attains independence. I'm thinking now of the African Americans, right? Right? Is there no longer prejudice against them, right? Okay. Of course there is, because they're different, right? And they feel it, and they know it, right? And so do we. Now, when it comes to the Merchant of Venice, I want to tell you again some little incidents. My mother told me that my parents went to see the play in 1932 in Essen, the city where they lived, where I was born, right? And they felt the passion and the hatred rising in the audience. Right? So in the interval they fled, and she used the word fled, right? Because there was such intense hatred in the audience, right? Okay, that had been generated by the play. Right? Now, the second incident was seeing the play at Stratford-on-Avon with Michael Redgrave in the main role, and seeing it at a matinee when a lot of the audience are sort of the middle class, upper middle class people who live around the area, what are called the county British or English, and there aren't many Jews in that area, but these are educated people. They're not, they're not the riffraff. And there comes a moment in the play, and I'm going to come back to it when we look at the text now, right, where when Shylock is preparing to cut the flesh from Antonio, right, he sharpens his knife on the sole of his shoe, right? As one does, you know, he wets the knife on the sole of his shoe. That's what people used to do, right? They didn't have rubber soles, right? They had leather soles, and you could sharpen your knife that way. And one of the characters says to him, "Not on thy soul, S-O-L-E, but on thy soul, S-O-U-L," right? Okay, right. Anyway, that's the text, right? But the action that that text demands is that the actor playing Shylock at that point whets his knife in readiness to cut the flesh from Antonio's body, right? And what do I hear from the two ladies in front of me? Dirty Jews, they're all the same. Right? Okay. Upper middle class, English, Stratford-on-Avon, you know, the Royal Shakespeare. And I'll never forget, again, this, you know, the shock, the sheer shock when you hear things like that, and you realize that there is still so much hatred, so much prejudice in the world in which we live. And I'll come to the film later on because I think it's very interesting from that point of view, the film and the interpretation. So now let's get down to the text itself, right? Is the play itself anti-Semitic? And what I've handed out to you is some significant passages which I think give us a clue as to how Shakespeare wanted us to perceive Shylock. And there are a number of speeches there. The order is, the extreme left-hand column is the first one that I want to relate to. Light isn't too good. Okay. This is, Shylock has just been approached to lend money. The Jews were the money lenders. Christians were forbidden religiously, and this comes through. Christians were not supposed to lend money for profit, right, for interest. It was the Jews who did that, so the Jews were the official money lenders, bankers, if you like. Today we call them bankers. And because of that, because they demanded interest, they were also despised. There was a clear connection between what they were allowed to do and the way in which they were perceived. So this is Shylock's speech when Antonio, who wants to help his good friend Bassanio, comes and asks for a loan, right? Because Antonio, who is the merchant of Venice, by the way, the merchant of Venice is not Shylock, it's Antonio, right? But Antonio at the moment has no ready cash, and all his ships are abroad. He just hasn't got the money which he would like to give to his friend Bassanio. And it's interesting to note why Bassanio wants the money, right? He explains to Antonio, the first line of his speech is, "In Belmont is a lady richly left, and she is fair," right? But the first thing he says about Portia, this Bassanio, who admits to having spent all his money, right, is that she is rich. And so he wants to go and seek her hand. He's never met her. Right? He only knows about her. They've never met. Right? That's the first thing. So he comes, he's they ask Antonio for money, and Antonio says, or rather, Antonio asks Shylock for money, and Shylock responds with this speech. Signor Antonio, many a time and oft in the Rialto you have rated me about my moneys and my usances. Still have I borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spat upon my Jewish gabardine, and all for use of that which is mine own. Well then, it now appears you need my help. Go to then. Right? You come to me and you say, Shylock, we would have monies. You say so. You, oh God, I can't see, the light is terrible. Is there no way of getting these lights on as well? The print's small, my eyes are bad, right, okay. Oh, that is absolutely wonderful, yes. That'll help. Shylock, we would have monies, you say so. You that had void your room upon my beard, that is spat upon my beard, right? And foot me, kick me, as you spurn a stranger cur. Spurn a stranger cur over your threshold. Right? Money is your suit. What should I say to you? Should I not say, has a dog money? Is it possible a cur can lend 3,000 ducats? Or shall I bow low and in a bondman's key, with bated breath and whispering humbleness, say thus, fair sir, you spat on me on Wednesday last. You spurned me such a day another time. You called me dog, and to these courtesies, so one of you will have to read, I'll lend you that much money. Now, what does Antonio say? I am as like to call you so again, right? Okay? In other words, don't think that by giving me money, you're going to buy my favors, right? Okay? You want to lend me money? Lend me money. You don't want to? Then no, right? Okay? You're not doing me a favor. I'll return it. And there's no penitence here. And you see, what is important here is Shylock, the way in which he confronts Antonio, cites the way in which Antonio has treated him and says, well, now I should give you money. And Antonio says, yes, you want to, you don't want to, then never mind, right? But don't expect me to behave differently another time when I meet you in the Rialto, which was the trading place, as it were, of Venice, right? Okay. So that's one of the texts that I wanted to cite. The next one is, and then I want to, I'd like someone else to read it, I'm sorry. I can't possibly do it. No, but then the Act 1, Scene 3, the middle down below, right.
Hello, I'd be happy to read it with a good British accent.
Would you? No, that doesn't have to be a British accent. Okay, here, this one.
Okay.
Have you got it in yours?
Yes, I've got it.
Yes, right. Sure. Why don't you sit down?
It's okay. Oh, Father Abraham, yes? Oh, Father Abraham, what these Christians are, whose own hard dealings teaches them suspect the thought of others. Pray you, tell me this. If he should break his day, what should I gain by the exaction of the forfeiture? A pound of man's flesh taken from a man is not so estimable, profitable neither. As flesh of muttons, beefs, or goats, I say, to buy his favour I extend this friendship. If he will take it, so. If not, adieu. And for my love I pray you, wrong me not.
Great. Very good. Stay by me.
I'll stay by you. With pleasure.
Okay, right. So, in other words, the implication is, why does Shylock ask for that bond? Why? He doesn't know that Antonio's going to forfeit the bond. But the fact that Shylock says, all right, in guarantee, if you do, all I want, right, by way of repayment, if you fail to repay the money, is a pound of flesh. Right? Okay, what kind of response is that? In you, what's your response to hearing that? Right? You're the audience, right? He wants a pound. Now he says, oh, come on, really, I mean, what's a pound of flesh? This is just a joke, right? And we don't know until later, right, whether it isn't a joke. I mean, he says, what would I do with a pound of flesh? Right? So it seems to me that what Shakespeare is making very clear is, particularly given Antonio's wealth, although when Bassanio says, that Antonio has all these ships and everything will be all right, Shylock says, well, ships are ships, and there are sea pirates and land pirates and so on. So the fact that he has all this money out on the seas doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be able to repay me. But I think it is not likely that Shylock really anticipated that a day would come when he would be able to demand the fulfillment of that bond. Right? And it's only afterwards, right, what is it that sparks off his real fury? The elopement or the stealing of his daughter. The stealing of his daughter, who takes with her everything in the house, all the money, all the gold, right, and the ring that Shylock's wife, Leah, gave him. Right? And it's that he mourns most, when he hears afterwards how she spent money, what she paid for a monkey in Genoa, right? And that she gave the ring as part payment. And he says, I had it from Leah. I would not have given it for a wilderness of monkeys. Right? And there's that human touch about Shylock, right? That one line, I think, which makes you see a different aspect of Shylock. And it's true, he does in that speech mix up, afterwards these two horrible Venetians, Salario and Solinio, make fun of him. Oh, my ducats, my daughter, my ducats. But he does, in one speech where he bewails her leaving the house, being stolen. Later on, someone one of the Christians refers to her as being stolen from his house. Right? Okay? But it's not as satirically presented by Shakespeare as these two very insalubrious characters presented. And this is another point that we have to notice. How are the Venetians presented? How are the non-Jews presented? Spendthrifts, right? Promiscuous. By the way, the film does this beautifully, the way in which it presents this dissolute Venice, right? It's not that the non-Jews are good, right? Apart from Antonio. Right? But then Antonio's an anti-Semite and admits to hating Jews and admits to mistreating Jews and says, my attitude to you is not going to change. Right? Okay. But I think that Shylock, the speech we just looked at, I think makes it clear that Shylock does not initially think he's going to have the opportunity to demand that pound of flesh. Right? Now, later on, when, if you look now at what comes up above, Act 3, Scene 1, right, where, do you want to read again for me, please? Yes, this,
Shylock?
yes, Shylock first. No, the last two lines of Salarino.
Okay. There is more difference? But tell us, do you hear whether Antonio have had any loss at sea or no? Shylock. There I have another bad match, a bankrupt, a prodigal who dare scarce show his head on the Rialto, a beggar that was used to come so smug upon the mart. Let him look to his bond. He was wont to call me usurer. Let him look to his bond. He was wont to lend money for a Christian courtesy. Let him look to his bond. Carry on. Why, I am sure if he forfeit, thou wilt not take his flesh. What's that good for? To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies. And what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? Fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be by Christian example? Why, revenge. The villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction.
It's one of the most powerful speeches. One of the most powerful speeches in the play, right? Am I not like you in everything? Right? What's different? I have hands, I have this. And this is the point. If you hurt us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in everything else, then why should we be different from you in that? Right? Okay. So Shylock sees taking revenge when one is hurt, harmed, right, as being as natural as having eyes, hands, whatever, right? That's the natural behavior. Get your own back. Get your revenge. Right? But in actual fact, what happens in the play, and this is the crux of the matter, right? When the time comes, and yes, he's going to get, there's the final trial before the Duke himself, right? And Shylock demands, and he keeps on and on. You'll see the word, my bond, my bond, my bond, I want my bond, right? Okay, which is justice, right? I have a contract, I want that, right? Okay. And in that tremendous trial scene where it's so tense, right? When Portia, dressed as a man, appears, right? This young lawyer appears and starts listening, yes, you know, and Shylock says, yes, you want bond, you're right. She says, yes, all in due course. And then admits, yes, you shall have your bond, right? And Shylock wets the knife on the foot of, and this is so powerful in the film. I've never seen it done like that on the stage. And there is Antonio bound, something in his mouth gagging him. The fear in his eyes as he lays open his breast and Shylock hovering over him with a knife. And then, there comes this cat and mouse scene between Portia and Shylock. Wait a minute, a pound of flesh, not an ounce more or an ounce less. It has to be precisely that. And not a drop of blood. There's no drop of blood in the contract, right? And Shylock at once realizes that he's been trapped. And he says, well, okay, in that case, just give me back my money. Right? Oh, no, it's not as easy as that, right? Because anybody who threatened the life of Venetian can be put to death, right? And if not that, then his money is taken away from him, right? And one thing after another, she whittles him down until he realizes he's just totally lost. But she has appealed to him before, in probably the most famous speech of the play. How does she appeal to him, right? He's saying, I want my bond, I want my bond. She says, be merciful. He says, why should I be merciful? And now, Portia's speech.
The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His sceptre shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And earthly power doth then show like as God's when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy. And that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. I have spoke thus much to mitigate the justice of thy plea, which if thou follow, this strict court of Venice must needs give sentence against the merchant there. Shylock, my deeds upon my head, I crave the law, the penalty and forfeit of my bond.
So what you've got here is essentially Midat Hadin versus Midat HaRachamim. Right? The law. The Jew represents the law. And he's right. Okay? The law does give him the pound of flesh. Right? Portia tries to avert his taking that bond, the fulfillment of the bond, by saying, look, be merciful. And this is her plea, right? The quality of mercy, he says, why? Why should I, right? Why must I? And she says, the quality of mercy is not strained, it's not something that you're compelled, it's not something that that is forced, right? A lovely image of it droppeth like the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. Right? And it's mightiest in the mighty, because it's the mighty have the power, the most power, either to exact justice or to show mercy. Right? So those are the two things that are really one balanced against the other. The Jew stands for justice, right? The Christian stands for mercy. insofar as Portia, yes, represents mercy. And Antonio is somewhere in the middle. Right? Antonio really is not a good man. Right, let's put it. He does not like Jews. He's not kind. He's not gentle. He's prepared to lend money to his friends, but he hates people like Shylock. Right? And he's not repentant at all. I am as like to call thee so again. Right? Okay. But at the end, he too shows mercy. Because when the judgment comes, that Shylock, okay, they won't put him to death, but he's got to render up all his money, right, okay, to the state. And the Duke says, no, I forego it. Half of it will go to Antonio. And Antonio also says, no, I don't need it. Give it to, right, Bassanio, to Lorenzo. Right? All of a sudden we see the Christians displaying that kind of mercy which Shylock has not been prepared to render. I want to come to you haven't got this, but at the very, very end, I just couldn't make so many copies, and now I can't. Okay. Where is it? Now you have to read this for me, and it's first I have to find it, right? I'm sorry. Too many papers. Yeah. I really can't see. That's terrible. I prithee give me leave to go from hence. Portia, what is that one?
That's the law hath yet another hold on you.
Yes,
It was put
okay.
against an alien.
Right, okay. This is the judgment that Portia renders, okay?
From Tarry Jew.
Yes.
I'll take it a bit nearer. Tarry Jew, the law hath yet another hold on
He's
you.
about to go. He says, okay, I'm a vater. I give up. I don't want anything. And now she comes back with it.
Tarry Jew, the law hath yet another hold on you. It is enacted in the laws of Venice, if it be proved against an alien that by direct or indirect attempts he seek the life of any citizen, the party against the which he doth contrive shall seize one half his goods, the other half comes to the privy coffer of the state, and the offender's life lies in the mercy of the Duke, only against all other voice, in which predicament, I say, thou standst. Carry on. For it appears by manifest proceeding that it indirectly, and directly too, thou hast contrived against the very life of the defendant, and thou hast incurred the danger formerly by me rehearsed. Down, therefore, and beg mercy of the Duke.
Right, go ahead. Yeah. This I want.
And now it's the Duke. No, from here, from Shylock?
I want Shylock.
Shylock. Not what the Duke says beforehand.
Yes, okay.
Okay, the Duke says to Shylock, that thou shalt see the difference of our spirits. I pardon thee thy life before thou ask it. For half thy wealth it is Antonio's, the other half comes to the general state, which humbleness may drive into a fine. Shylock says, nay, take my life and all, pardon not that. You take my house when you do take the prop that doth sustain my house. You take my life when you do take the means whereby I live.
Go ahead.
Portia says, what mercy can you render him, Antonio? Where from? From
Yes,
Antonio?
I want up to where Shylock goes up.
Okay. Who's gra? A halter gratis? Nothing else for God's
Graciano,
sake. Graciano. Antonio. So please, my lord, the Duke and all the court, to quit the fine for one half of his goods, I am content. So he will let me have the other half in use to render it upon his death unto the gentleman that lately stole his daughter.
Stole his daughter.
Two things provided more, that for this favour he presently become a Christian. The other, that he do record a gift here in the court of all he dies possessed unto his son Lorenzo and his daughter. The Duke says, he shall do this, or else I do recant the pardon that I late pronounced here. Portia, art thou contented, Jew? What dost thou say? Shylock, I am content. Portia, clerk, draw a deed of gift. Shylock, I pray you give me leave to go from hence. I am not well. Send the deed after me, and I will sign it.
That's Shylock's last line. Right? I prithee give me leave to go from hence. I am not well. Right? Now, this scene is where the director can decide on an interpretation. Right? How is Shylock? What happens to Shylock here? He says, you've taken my wealth. No, we're giving you half in use, but provided you then leave it, right? The way you will it the way we tell you to, right? And then he has to become a Christian, right? Okay. And that art thou content, right? And the final line, I prithee give me leave to go from hence. I am not well. Right? Now, in the remarkable Laurence Olivier production, Jonathan Miller production, in which Laurence Olivier played Shylock, right? When I came, I've never seen A Merchant of Venice where the audience did not feel revulsion towards Shylock. And I've given you some instances, right? I've cited them. So I came to England, and all my Jewish friends say, you've got to go and see this Merchant of Venice. It's marvelous, right? We didn't feel uncomfortable at all, and it's not anti-Semitic at all, and so I think, oh, wow, I have to go and see this. Laurence Olivier, Shylock, right? And I know the play. And I'm sitting there, and this very, very Jewish Shylock, very sympathetic, an elegant man. He is a wealthy man, after all, right? Even though he wears the Jewish gabardine. And I wait, and fine, and I'm waiting for that, my daughter's my ducats, that parody of him. Doesn't exist, it's not there. And I think, well, wait a minute, surely it should have come in the previous act. No. And then we get to the trial scene, and what's missing? He doesn't whet his knife upon his soul, right? Okay, that's left out, right? And then at the end, there was a marvelous touch when they make the final pronouncement, right? He slumps over. He's in a sort of witness box on the left, Portia's on the right. He slumps over, right? And Portia moves forward to help him get up, right? Okay. Now you immediately sense that, all right, she feels the kind of empathy or sympathy which no one else there feels. Right? But then came the final touch, right? The curtain goes down, and you hear the Kaddish being said by Shylock. Right? Now, it's very interesting. I mean, that not everybody in England knows what the Kaddish is, but the Jews in the audience know what the Kaddish is, and so do a lot of other people. Right? Now, how does that make you feel about Shylock? You see, it's a question of directing. You can manipulate, a director can manipulate, but you are manipulating in that case. But the text allows, you can't cut not on the soul. That shouldn't have been done. But the fact that, first of all, that pathetic, I prithee give me leave, right? I am not well. And Portia's sympathetic response immediately does something to the audience's reaction. even without the Kaddish. Right? And in the film, something similar happens that arouses a fascinating moment. Shylock has been made to be baptized a Christian, right? And so he comes to the gates of the ghetto, which we've seen all the time. We see the ghetto, we see the Jews in the ghetto, right, in their gabardines and so on, mingling also with the Venetians, with the dissolute Venetians, the bare-breasted women, right? And Shylock comes to the door of the ghetto, and it's clamped close in his face, right? And he's wearing the cross. In other words, he has nowhere to be. He has no place in the ghetto anymore, right? And again, that directorial intervention does something to the audience's feelings. Right? Okay. And that's why really, I think that one has to see a play in the theatre or in film, if at least, right? But you have to watch out for what the director is doing with the text, and what of that is legitimate and what isn't legitimate. Right? You can't just cut. You shouldn't. No, right, okay. And not only should you not cut the flesh, you shouldn't cut the flesh of the play. There's very little in Shakespeare that is extraneous. Almost every line counts, right? Some of the comedy doesn't make sense anymore because senses of humor have changed, and that's why some of the translations into Hebrew, such as those of particularly Dan Almagor's translations of the comedies, have the audience laughing because he's managed to find Israeli equivalents for those Elizabethan English jokes, right? And I saw, for example, the Comedy of Errors at Stratford, and nobody laughed. And then I saw it with the Camry in Almagor's translation, where he finds the Israeli equivalent, and people were, almost literally rolling in the aisles. So that is permitted. Bring it up to date from that point of view, but don't mangle the text. Now, so my bottom line on Merchant of Venice is that it is a far more ambivalent and ambiguous play than it might seem at first, right? It is not the kind of anti-Semitic manifesto that the audience in Essen in 1932 saw it as, right? It is not the kind of apologia for Jews that Jonathan Miller, who of course himself is Jewish, turned it into with Laurence Olivier, right? By cutting, by leaving things out, by subtly, leaving things out, I think, yes.
You were mentioning a film by Laurence Olivier. A few years back, Al Pacino also made a film about this. I didn't hear it. Did you think that one was a good film? Because I heard that the studio didn't maneuver that one. And it was more sympathetic to Shylock. What did you think?
Of what?
The Al Pacino film. Is that the film?
I thought it was marvelous.
That's the film. That's the film.
Oh,
you're
it was
referring to.
wonderful. It was wonderful. It was wonderful because you see, on the one hand, it was wonderful because the director put in that last scene, which so stressed. You don't know from the play what happened to Shylock afterwards, right? It ends with he's lost everything, right?
I just saw it in England with the Globe,
Yes.
and it ends with his daughter saying Ashanti, Bagabati.
Wow. Wow. Now, I wonder what Shakespeare would have said of that. By the way, he's got a point. If you go back to the scene in Belmont. That's another, well, you need another hour. In Belmont, you know, where Lorenzo, after all, Lorenzo with Jessica have gone along with Bassanio. They're now all at Portia's court, right? And they have this beautiful scene on such a night as this, right? This moonlit night and so on. And they compare it with great love stories, right? Every one of the examples is one of betrayal, right? It's not Romeo and Juliet. It's the lover who betrays, right? The famous, you know, the things that end unhappily. And the final line is, and on such a night as this did Lorenzo steal the Jew Jessica, and so on, right? So by giving you all those examples, Shakespeare does make it quite clear, yes, that there was a comparison there, that this also was not really going to be a happy marriage, right? Now, in the film as well, he has, am I right, Jessica standing on the shore of Belmont and looking across at Venice, and then you see that final scene of Shylock locked out of the thing, out of the ghetto, so that again it can be. Yes, I think that is fair, because you have a justification in the text for that kind of directorial interpretation. It's not an intervention, it really is an interpretation. But ad cadea shanti bagadati, you know, that, it's interesting though. Again, like the Kaddish, I mean, how many of the old Kaddish Nicha, you know, I think more non-Jews know about Kaddish than about Ashamti Bagadati.
I don't know who the director was, but the first scene of Jessica with Shylock is in Yiddish.
As Venetian Jews spoke Yiddish, of course.
Im Quadradino, lo. Okay, well, I warned you we wouldn't get to Othello, but let me say one word about Othello, nevertheless. Othello is a Moor. He comes from North Africa, right? He is not an African Negro. Right? Very important, but he's black. Right? He's different. He's older, considerably older, right, than Desdemona, right? He woos Desdemona with the stories that he tells of his extraordinary adventures, right? There is a nobility about him. He even says, if I were a boaster, I could talk about the royal blood from which I come, right? But he's an outsider. And the first response we hear to that is when Brabantio, the father of Desdemona, hears that they've married. And if you look at the imagery there, it shows Othello as bestial. Really, the comparisons, the imagery is of a beast, right? Even Iago talks about, you know, Othello, the black bull, a tapping of your hue, white hue, E-W-E. So the color there is absolute, the color and the greatness, and this, he's different. But the important thing about Othello is that he's a foreigner, right? And in that respect, he's different from Shylock. And Iago, who is, I think, the personification of sheer evil, sheer motiveless evil, right? Iago uses the fact of his being a stranger both to rouse enmity towards him, but also to undermine Othello's sense of security. You don't know the Venetians, you trust them, you think Desdemona's pure. Oh no, we're all promiscuous, right? In other words, he paints his own people negative in order to convince Othello, right, that he can't trust Desdemona. And I think that there's the difference, the vital difference. I know of no other character in Shakespeare where there is such pure motiveless evil. It's one speech in which he grasps the motives. You know, he didn't promote me, and then even people say that he slept with my wife, one thing after another. And when a person raises so many reasons, right, no connection between them, no relationship with them, and certainly no relationship to the truth as far as we know, right, then you can see that what exists here is just a desire to destroy. Right? And the only other character that Shakespeare portrays as so essentially evil is Richard III, who also sets out at the beginning of the play, he tells the audience, he takes us into his mind, right? We always know in advance what Richard III is going to do. The same with Iago. He says to himself, right? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. So we always know, and that leaves us, as it were, in a state of suspense, wondering, well, he's going to do it, but how are the people going to respond? And every time his trickery works, every time people act the way in which he has manipulated their acting, right? So in this respect, it's completely different, but it's the fact that from The Merchant of Venice, but in both cases, it's the fact that there's a character, the protagonist, who is an outsider, who is different from the society in which he lives, that sets off the tragedy. Okay? So I'm sorry I couldn't read the text. I'm very, very grateful.
It was my pleasure.
Beautiful. You read wonderfully.